Hi guys, what's up? It's Will here once again, just for my yearly video that I love doing. I love doing these videos and have done them for I think the last 4 or 5 years, and especially this time of the year, moving into the new year, it's always something I like to keep an eye on and look at going into the new year. So, in this video, I'm going to be giving you 10 fighters the UFC should sign in 2024. And I've had varying luck with a lot of these guys that have moved into the UFC over the years. There's some years I've hit a lot. There's some years I've hit a few. Last year was okay with some of the ones that get in, but I've got a list here. This year I found a little bit harder. There wasn't as many pure cut ones that I thought were definitely going to be like Christian Leroy Duncan and such. Last year I had in like Saladin Parnas, who I've had in for the last few years. Definitely doesn't look like he's going to be going to the UFC, even though it's maybe the time to do so, considering he's kind of maybe achieved everything he could in KSW, tried for the third belt, but I guess he might be making decent money once he stick out there for a little while longer. So he's not on my list this year. But like I say, I've got 10 fighters here. Some I do keep an eye on a lot of the prospects outside of the UFC, but there's that many fight cards going on. It's hard to kind of keep track with all these. So let's get into some of these here. I will bring them up. I'm just going to go into the split screen here and where am I going? Present. Extra camera video file. I'm going in here. There we go. So I'm going to get into this here, guys. The very first one that I'm moving into here, the number 10. There's no real. I've got 10 guys. I'm just going to go from 10 down to 1, and I'll show you the list of honourable mentions at the end. 7-1 here, Hector Sosa, a guy that I know a little bit about, and a guy who I don't think is overly a great fighter, a good fighter even, but a guy with a fairly decent record. And the reason I'm putting Sosa in here this year is the fact that there's been a lot of talk of the UFC going to Spain. Now, if the UFC gets a new champion in Ilia Topuria in the next couple of months, I think there's a grand chance that the UFC might go to Spain for the first time. Dana spoke about it. They will look to add more Spanish fighters, I think, for a card if they were to have it in Spain. And for me, outside of Daniel Barres, who's already in the UFC, a guy I think they could definitely bring in is Sosa here. Like I say, he's not fought the greatest caliber of opposition, but again, they're going to need guys coming in from Spain. And like I say, he's not beat the greatest talents. Adam Robinson, I know a little bit, but like 0-0, 3-1, 4-1. So it might be a little bit too early, but I'm just kind of going on the fact that possibly the UFC, if they go to Spain, they're going to look in to bring more guys. And Sosa is a guy I ultimately think could make his way into the UFC. So moving on, we've got Badmatsyren Dorzhiev, 8-0, the Immortal Lotus, as he's known as, a guy that I've had my own for the last couple of years, fighting out of Russia that I see there, but I think it's Tajikistan and none of these guys, I think. I can never remember. But a guy who I really only kind of came familiar with roundabout here, 2021, against that fight against Diaz, who's a guy that he fought, who's got a lot of experience, like nearly 40 odd fights at the time. And since then, he's went on to win that. He had a fairly kind of quiet 2022. I think there was an injury there that I went in and did a little bit of research on. But this year, got 2 fights in, just one before the summer and one during the summer. This one here, Anthony Pettis FC, and this one here against Shamal Finley. So this one was a fairly decent one. And I always think the UFC can add more flyweights. I think there's a ton of fly. I said this last year with Asu Almabayev. There was Azat Maxim. They can add more guys and bulk out this division. He's at that age there, 29. Very, very solid fighter. Very, very dangerous. And like I say, they need more flyweights, in my opinion. They need to get some more new talent coming into the rankings because I do think there's guys that can easily come out of the rankings. I think Dorzhiev is definitely a guy that can make his way into the UFC, and possibly see him, since he's been fighting in the US the last couple of fights. I think he's a guy that could come in short notice. Could be a guy that he maybe goes through the Dana White Contender Series and gets his opportunity. But I think there's a good chance we see this guy in the UFC in 2024. This one here, I think, is absolutely... I think she's going to get signed very soon, i.e. within the next couple of months, honestly. She's still very... Not that super experienced, but Fatima Klein here, 5-0 record. I've been super impressed from what I've seen her, and she's very, very young. She's a very, very close stablemate of Erin Blanchfield, I believe. 23 years old, so both girls very, very young. They are coming up together. Someone I think she's going to get signed for that Atlantic City card that Erin Blanchfield, I think, will headline, if she's not already, against Manon Fiorot. Like I say, still very, very young, but if they were to take her very, very slow, I think that she could ultimately come into the UFC, build her confidence, and win some fights, and be a problem for some people in that division. Now, this fight here, I'm not taking too much away from. She dominated the fight. This girl came in here in a couple of days' notice, looked a little bit out of shape, looked like she shouldn't have really fought that weight class. Ultimately, she showed off her striking, got a little bit better. But ultimately, her grappling is where she kind of got it done. Then in the third round there, she managed to get some striking off and finish the fight. But just a solid fighter on the ground, good grappler. But she needs that step up in caliber position. Again, if she doesn't get signed early, like I think she will, I think she's another one of these girls that will definitely make her way into the Dana White Contender Series in the summer. Ultimately, she makes her way probably into the UFC through that. I'd be super confident. If I was to pick one person who I think that would get signed off this list more than anybody, I think it's going to be Fatima Klein. So that's another one there. Moving on, we've got Austin Bashi, 11-0 record. A guy I've had my eye on for, I want to say, a couple of years. Still very young, still very inexperienced. Really needs probably a little bit more experience out there. But he's got some fights in this year. That's what you like to see with these guys. And like I say, when making your way into the UFC, whether they get signed outright or through Dana White's Contender Series, I think some of these people that are in here, there's other fighters you would think, right, you should get signed straight up. This is another one that could go through Dana White's Contender Series and quit the UFC here. So, like a strong guy across the rounds, good wrestling, striking's ever improving, starting to kind of get, this was a bigger step up here in this Lights Out Championship. So, this would have been a good fight I would like to see him from against Ricky Bandejas, because he's got a lot of high caliber opposition that he's faced before, and this was a step up. And ultimately, I would like to see him in the UFC very, very soon. Yeah, and the guys coming out of Michigan are always kind of tough. Bantamweight, I think possibly I would like to see him at 125, but I don't know whether that cut would be a little bit too much. But Austin Bashi for me is the next guy that I've got in my list. Up next, Samandar Murodov, 9-0, a quiet guy that's been coming through for the last couple of years. Like I say, all young guys, a lot of young fighters in this list here. 24 years old, fighting out of Tajikistan, and just a really fighting under his dad, I think it is. Really good submission grappler, and really, I think we've seen him here on the road to the UFC. He's already kind of had that exposure to being in and around UFC. The matchmakers will know who this guy is, and he's had some fairly decent wins, like 19-3, 10-0. The UFC will know who this guy is, like I say, and especially if they had him on this road to the UFC. And then he went in there and beat another fairly decent guy. Got some good striking, good grappling, can do it all. I think this would be another great addition to the UFC, especially in the welterweight division. I do think they need some more guys. I think it's a little bit of a changing of the guard. They need more people to come in and build up through the divisions. This is a guy here that I think could do that and be a ranked fighter within the next 3 years. So Murodov's the guy that I would like to see come in. This guy, destroyer. Islam Omarov, 14-0 record. I think, like I say, over the years, I've mentioned some of these guys, the Russian fighters that I think if they wanted to, the UFC would go and sign a lot of these guys. But I think they're a little bit scared that they might come in here and kind of rule the divisions, so that's why I think they pick and choose which talents they kind of go after. Because there is an abundance of guys that could go out there over the years, the last 5 years. Frolov, Rizov, they've got Tumanov, they've got guys out there, Vartanyan, they've got guys out there that could go and sign for days that could be legit challengers in the division. But I think they're a little bit scared of bringing in all these Russians and then being heavy, like predominant champions throughout the division. So look at these stats here, well-rounded, 3 wins by knockout, very good submission grappler, can go the distance, has been fighting legit opposition over there in ECA. Look at some of these records that he's beaten in. He's getting them out of there. Suleymanov's a really solid fighter. I've known about him for many, many years. Beat Bekzat Tumanov. That's a guy, like I say, I actually think I bet Bekzat Tumanov in that fight, if I remember right, and thinking, yeah, this guy's going to be really good. And this was a couple of years ago, nearly 3 years ago. So I think he would do work in the UFC. But whether they go out and get him, it's another thing. I want to see him in the UFC. We'll see where we kind of go with that. Hopefully they sign him. This guy here, I think he's probably, outside with Saladin Parnas, is probably one of my favourite fighters in regional MMA across the world. Massive fan of this guy. Like, really, I would pay good money to come and see this guy if he was fighting amongst Europe for the UFC. I don't miss the fights this guy has in Octagon. I just don't. Great age, 26 years old, fighting out of Guinea, Belgium is where he stays. And his only loss was a freak injury where he snapped his foot, and he's already been back. And that was the 7th. 4 or 5 months later, he's already back winning a belt again against a fairly decent guy. And he's fought decent guys in these promotions. Samuel Bark's a good striker. This is the guy that I think that I would like to see in the UFC. I think if that fight played out, I think Keita would beat him. But this guy is an absolute pure destroyer. Seeks your chin. Once he finds out a weakness, you are dead meat. And you can see by his finishes here, like uppercuts, punches. Like I say, he is just an absolute. Look at these guys are solid. Ronald Paradise, he just won a belt there in Octagon. Ivan Bushinger. I mean, he's fought really good guys for a couple of years now. Like I say, still fairly young. This guy, you'll see there, he only started like 2020 or so. But this is the guy I would like to see, one of the guys out there, the standout talents in regional MMA. And this is the thing, if the UFC don't sign these guys, the PFL and Bellator have came together, you could start to see some of these guys, especially if I'm like Dan Hardy with the European side, trying to sign some of these guys, build the PFL. Do you really see them going to maybe the American version of the PFL? No, but if the European side can sign them, sign up for the PFL, go through there, get them into these American tournaments, then this guy here, I think, has got all the world talent to go on and win belts or win tournaments that potentially get to winning belts. I think this guy would be a big ranked fighter in the UFC. He's a destroyer. He's one of my favourite guys in the world. Lusina Keita, if you've not heard about this guy, go out and watch his fights. You won't be disappointed. This one was the guy I had in last year, Paul Hughes. No idea why the UFC don't sign this kid. There's been a couple of occasions where he said that there's been chances for him to go, short notice opportunities, but he just wasn't ready. I think this is the last. I think if he doesn't get signed in the kind of next couple of months, I think this could be a guy that makes his way to the PFL. He wants the UFC, but for some reason the UFC just haven't picked him up. He's been ready for a couple of years, and he's beat guys in the UFC already, like Ashari, beat Jordan Vucenic in a great fight. That loss there, I probably shouldn't have lost. Moved up there against J.K. Higgins at 155, knocked him stiff. So interesting if it was 145, 155. I think he says he's committed himself to 155, which I think is the right thing for him. He's a growing boy. Time is now. If they don't get him, he might make his way to like a PFL, where I think he would do great work over there. But I think UFC is where he wants to go. They really should take him if they can. Shoeing for the UFC. He's been a shoe-in for the UFC for 18 months now at least. So hopefully they sign Paul Hughes. But I can have a sneaky feeling he's going to go to the PFL. I think the UFC are going to just not sign this guy, and that he's going to go to the PFL. So, but I would love to see him in the UFC, and this is why I've added him on my list here. Felipe Lima is up next. 25, like I say, a really good age. Fighting out the All-Stars gym in Sweden, 12-1 record, Octagon champion, just coming off a win over Jonas Magard, who's, I think he's fighting for the belt again in early part next year against Jack Cartwright. Yeah, record says everything there, like he's beat decent guys throughout, 6-0 guys, 8-1 guys, and this was a good win over Magard, who is a really solid regional guy within the kind of European sphere. Just really good, can break you down with leg kicks, can grapple you, can go long in the fight hard for many rounds. And he's got a little bit of that death touch early on in the fights. I think he's a shoe-in for if the European cards, if they do them in the UFC, like there's talk this year of Spain, France. I think this guy would be a great addition to a fight card like that. So Felipe Lima is a guy I would like to see the UFC pick up. And the kind of last one I'm going to go into before I really have a look at the list of guys is Baissangour Chamsoudinov here, 8-0, fighting out of France, originally I think from Chechnya yet. So one of these guys that's kind of made his way from Russia over to France, MMA Factory guy. The thing is, he fights under idiris, which is run by Fernand Lopez, and they usually tie him down to pretty good contracts. But I get another guy I love watch fight. I think he's a really, really good, exciting fighter. Like I say, got some big power in his hands, can go long into fights, can be dominant in rounds, and he's beat fairly decent opposition for what we've seen here. 6-0, 9-0, and then he's got that kind of name window, a guy that's been in the UFC many years ago, but a veteran of the sport and got him out there, probably past his prime. This was going to be a great fight. This is a fighter that I haven't added to the list, but I think I did. I might have added him last year. Felix Klinkhammer, another really, really solid guy. This was going to be a great fight. Fight got cancelled ultimately. This was a good fight. Deirdrick's a solid fighter. He's just coming off a loss. But yeah, I think the UFC, going back to France, this would be a great guy to add to the card. He'll be well known in Paris. But I did say that with Abdul, the Lazy King last year. And they never signed him, and he's made his way to the PFL. So would it surprise me if he maybe moved over to the PFL? I think I'd be a little bit shocked that he would, because I think he'd maybe do better in the UFC. But ultimately, I think Baki would be a good addition to the UFC ranks at some point. So hopefully he gets the opportunity, but he might need a little bit more experience. A couple other fights, and maybe come in towards the later part of the year when that France card comes in. Maybe get to the UFC 10-0 and they try and build this guy up. I think he could be a fairly decent, good fighter. Might touch the rankings one day, but I think he'll give us good fights regardless. So going back in here, sorry guys, just let me come in here. I don't know if you can see this as well. So yeah, there's my list there. And here is some other fighters I think you should keep an eye on. I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are just ones that I've added that might get signed this year or potentially within the next 18 to 24 months. Bekzat Almakhan, great record, really solid fighter. Really think he'd be a good addition. Damir Tolenov, another, like I said, these are all good fighters. Luke Riley, big fan of Luke Riley. This is the guy that's got that win over Lasina Keita. It wouldn't surprise me if he made his way over there. Sean Clancy Jr., shout out for Sean Clancy here. He's from Scotland. Very early on in his career, made that step up to the kind of Cage Warrior side. This might be a guy you see in 2 or 3 years, but a guy right now you should keep an eye on. I think he will make his way to the UFC one day. Same with this one here, Ibragim Ibragimov fighting out of Manchester, top team. Cody Haddon fighting out of Australia, a really solid guy. Ewan Davis, sorry, and Cage Warriors, the guy I like watching fight. He might be a fight a couple of years down the line that makes his way into the UFC. Maritza Sanchez, she's just coming off a big win not too long ago. I think they're always wanting to add females into the UFC, so Maritza could be one. Rose Conceição, I think she's on the verge of probably making her way to the UFC. I've got Sosa in there for some reason, as Dorzhiev, and I don't know why I never take them off. And these two here, I think this guy's not far off. An Chuan Ho might need a couple more fights, but that guy's all action and ready to go. And I think Barboza, he was scheduled to come in for a UFC fight later, or maybe in the Sao Paulo card. So they've got eyes on this guy that I think that he can give some exciting fights. So, yeah, ultimately that is kind of my list there for the rest of the year. There's a couple of guys on Twitter that I put out too that added Richie Miranda, someone I'm not overly familiar with, so I'll go in to have a look at him. Mark Hume from down in South Africa. And there was other guys there that I cannot remember the names of who they may be. But that's just a list of some fighters I would like to see come into the UFC in the next few years on that list there. But ultimately, 10 fighters I want to see come to the UFC to make it better this year. So if you've watched this video, if you've got this far through, 20 minutes, 21 minutes, if there's a fighter out there that you think I should have my eye on, if I've not seen already, put it in the column, the drop-down box, the comment box, wherever it may be, and I will get back and I will have a look at some of these guys when I have the time. But looking forward to breaking down fights again in 2024. I'm probably going to get a video out tomorrow, I believe, kind of having an early look at UFC Vegas. I think I can't remember the number, maybe 84. Johnny Walker is the main event against Magomed Ankalaev. But yeah, just a little video, guys, to get out there. I always love doing these. Until the next time, take care and all the very, very best. And happy